what does this moment mean for those people who are kind of crowing from the rooftops and saying like, hey, everything I said was right, everything that these guys were saying was wrong, and it's all over for them? What do you say to them?
What I would take from it is a good example of the kind of the headwinds that anyone has working in greenhouse gas removal most broadly, is that you've got a lot of people who expect perfection now, and you've got a lot of people who think that if it isn't perfect now, it's never going to be perfect, and therefore we shouldn't do anything, we shouldn't look at it at all. And it's not the case. There's just research that needs to be done, and it does take time, unfortunately, and that's just the nature of it.
Hey, it's Richard Delevan. Welcome back to Wicked Problems, and we're so delighted we could be joined today. It's Carbon Removals Week, so we're joined by two excellent folks from the Carbon Technology Research Foundation. We've got Philippa Amina, Communications and Impact Specialist, or kind of manager from there, from CTRF, we call it from now on, and Luke Williams, Head of Research. So thank you both for coming on Wicked Problems. Luke, where are you based now? You're in like a very like proper professional kind of office space.
Yes, we're this is our office in Oxford, basically. So yes, it's a little bit white, but we get used to it.
Okay, that's like it's very 2001. Like I keep waiting for someone to come and like, feed you some blue food or something. I don't know what's going on. Philippa, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah. I'm in another end of the country, actually. I'm based in Cornwall. I'm actually sitting at the moment on the campus of the University of Exeter. So yeah, we will work together kind of in different parts of the country, but come together in Oxford as a central kind of HQ for CTR.
Well, I will not tell my Devonian in-laws that you have described the Exeter as being in Cornwall.
This is part of the
cause a
campus.
problem, and like
No.
I'm joking.
Yeah, we're in
I didn't realize that a satellite campus. Where is it?
Yeah, it's in Penryn near Falmouth. They've got part of the campus based here. Yeah.
Well, I will be down in Portscatho near Falmouth not too long from now, in about a month. Yeah, we love it down there. So great, good stuff. Great. Well, thank you guys both for joining us. And we wanted to get you on in part for lots of reasons, because I think what you guys are doing is fascinating. But we were, episode that came out this morning, we were talking with Robert Hoglund, the co-founder of CDR.FYI and a market actor in Milky Wire, talking about some of the recent travails of the kind of the marquee brand in carbon removals, particularly for direct air capture, Climeworks, which is going through some things, I guess they would say, at the moment. And I think that it'd just be interesting to get your perspective about you guys have been working in this space. Like, what does this moment mean for those people who are kind of crowing from the rooftops and saying like, hey, everything I said was right, everything that these guys were saying was wrong, and it's all over for them? What do you say to them?
What I would take from it is a good example of the kind of the headwinds that anyone has working in greenhouse gas removal most broadly, is that you've got a lot of people who expect perfection now, and you've got a lot of people who think that if it isn't perfect now, it's never going to be perfect, and therefore we shouldn't do anything, we shouldn't look at it at all. And it's not the case. There's just research that needs to be done, and it does take time, unfortunately, and that's just the nature of it. And the society these days quite frequently likes things that are more immediate. It's a broad thing, and unfortunately, any bad news can get magnified, like it has in this particular case, I think.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would add to that. I think one thing to take away from it that we would have said before any difficulties came along is what's really important when it comes to carbon removals, because we do need them, that's unarguable, is we need a diversified approach in the same way you would with any type of organization you may be investing in. You would hedge in terms of solutions. So I think what this does is shines more of a spotlight on that need. We need everything. It's not a pick and mix. We need everything. And we need to focus our attention on multiple areas, including the work that we're doing.
I think it's fair to say that, again, for probably understandable reasons, DAC being an entirely chemical, mechanical kind of process seems like it just was more understandable to folks in the Valley or folks in VC who said like, yeah, I get what you're doing. We do rights law. We can get like, cross the cost curve and all that good stuff. And then you're going to talk about this mushy like bio stuff. And I don't really like get uncomfortable, right, when I have to start talking about that. But to your point, sorry, I want to take a step back. One of the things that CTRF says as part of its mission is the importance of transparency and trust, right? So do we think, just before we move on and focus more on what you guys do, is this a moment where trust has been impaired in this nascent kind of industry? Without putting you on the spot, what is your initial take on like whether or not there's a lot of work to do to fix that?
Yeah, I would say that trust is something that there's trust, and then there's the perception of, and the sort of where the truth actually lies within all the information that's out there. And I think the fact that questions are being asked is a positive thing, because it means there's a spotlight on this space, which is really underrepresented in the media and in public consciousness. So that's good. But the risk can be that a skewed perception is put out there, not a balanced kind of fact-based a set of information that people can make their own minds up about. It's like anything else. So I think it's really important that we kind of retain a kind of balance and sort of education in terms of what CDR is, what it isn't, what it might do, what it can't do. I think it's unfair to level criticism in terms of what should have been said and what shouldn't for us to do that. We're, for CTRF, we're about understanding the science, scrutinizing that science, and then deciding what to fund. That's where we're coming from, because actually you're just wasting time if you're doing anything else and potentially wasting money.
Right. So again, this conversation, the conversation I was having this morning with, we put out this morning with Robert Hoglund, he was talking about that we're using the Gartner hype cycle of technology as a kind of framework for understanding that, we are now in the expected kind of trough of disillusionment, right? And I suppose that's like that. I think that might be unfair of how it applies entirely to carbon removals, because I do think that there are areas that, within that space, as you were saying, there are different kind of stacks, different kinds of approaches, different technologies. And so I want to understand better about like where CTRF is coming from and like why you guys think, if I'm not wrong in saying this, that we are missing a trick for not having kind of looking for kind of opportunities to scale what's already kind of working in nature. So maybe either of you could just say more about, like what your approach is and what makes it different.
Certainly. So as you say, nature exists, and so it is working very well. Humanity's kind of overwhelmed it slightly, which is why we are where we are. So CTRF takes the perspective that if we can just improve what already exists even slightly, then that's going to have a fairly large impact compared to having to construct everything from start. You mentioned DAC, there are plenty of other options as well, but it's a human built approach rather than sort of a nature enhanced approach. So agriculture is one example of a large system that we're always going to be using. So if we improve that by a few percentage points, then look at the scale of agriculture in sort of the corn in Iowa or wheat in East Anglia. It doesn't matter where you are and what kind of crop you're looking at. And wider still, there are other systems. For example, the oceans are almost completely unexplored in many areas, and there's plenty that can be done there as well.
Okay, so I mean, but in terms of like, as I understand it, like what you guys really focus on, right? That's different from these mechanical, chemical solutions. I mean, there's plenty of chemistry in some of the projects that you guys fund, obviously, but there is a biological kind of lean to it. So, Luke, as you were just saying, right? So, the algae, in the oceans, phytoplankton, whatever else, like they, absorb already. The reason the oceans have been a sink, right, for CO2. For so long, in part, has been the fact that these organisms have sucked up this carbon, right? And so a lot of the projects that, if I read them correctly, the briefs on them, that you guys are backing are ones that seek to kind of build on, some of these qualities in either a microorganism or kind of a larger, more complex plant organism, about how to accelerate this, how to make them go faster, like as opposed to like I'll just plant a tree or I'll just like whatever. Like so tell me, we do get into the weeds here, so don't feel like you can't. Go as nerdy as you like, and we can always fix it later if we go too far. But I'd rather have the detail than not. So like, give me some more, depth about like what you guys think is the underexplored approaches to this problem, the solution to this problem, and what we should be looking at.
Certainly. So, for example, one of the byproducts of the agricultural revolution is that we have built crops essentially to, once you've harvested them, to degrade as quickly as possible. This releases a huge amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the air, because you kind of enhance the soil microbiome whilst you're not actually growing anything in that field. And so one of our projects is being used to examining, can we reverse that without impacting the yield of the food? And what this kind of perspective kind of unlocks is you can then start looking at what the overlaps are across other different areas. So as I've already mentioned agriculture, I'll just keep going with that one. There's lots of people looking at food security issues, how to get more food out of any given field. Well, if you look at how you can increase that crop to improve the amount of carbon it takes up, well, that's very likely going to lead to yield improvements. You can also tie it into reduced water usage. There are other kind of co-benefits you can look at, which don't have to be competitive. You can look at them at the same time, and you can have a win-win situation.
So let me back you up there in just 1 second. Let me make sure I got this right. So essentially, like going back to Thomas Malthus even before, right? Like the big problem people were worried about in terms of scarcity was that we would run out of the ability to, feed the people that we were going to produce, and that the crop yields that we had weren't going to be able to do that. So we developed a whole suite of solutions that weren't foreseen, and that's why Malthus's maths were wrong, because they just failed to anticipate some of these innovations. We went through a whole then period of half of American imperialism being driven by the pursuit of guano, to be able to get access to bird poop, to be able to make that into fertilizer, followed by taking nitrogen out of the air and making that into fertilizer, and like blah 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 blah. Anyway, point being, like we've had these, and before getting into what is it, Norman Borlaug and dwarf wheat, right? Several innovations that have like just outperformed previously understood limitations about what was available. And so what you're proposing, if I hear you correctly, right, is that because carbon, as some of the more climate denying folks would like to say, is plant food. Well, okay, sure, great. So what if we were to engineer crops or other organisms in such a way that we were able to increase yield because they're going to grow faster, they're going to do other things because they're going to soak up more carbon? Is that about it?
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the projects that Luke's been referring to is headed by Professor Luke Mackinder at the University of York, together with colleagues in Princeton and Edinburgh. And that specifically is looking at taking a mechanism from algae. Algae, I've discovered, basically hoover CO2. So whilst plants generally move it passively into their systems, algae hoover. So there's a greater efficiency. So it's looking at engineering that mechanism from algae into plants, which would substantially increase their carbon capture potential. And the natural question from that is, great. That means we can produce more food, use less land, rely on less water, create some climate resilience and adaptation of crops, all those benefits. But the question is, well, we eat it and it's still released. So within his proposition, he's been looking at agricultural systems and how they actually work. And one way to capture that carbon could be to look at planting break crops. So farmers have to do this anyway. So building it into the agricultural system in a way that's meaningful for farmers. So planting hemp, for example, as break crops that could then be used as building materials, or or other products. So with the projects we select, we're really mindful to challenge the academics to go beyond the science and to look at scalable impact. So at the point of selection, that's something we are considering. We're not just looking at what might be a scientific advantage. We're looking at the real world. How will this look? How can it scale? What might the barriers be, and how can we overcome them? So that's probably a good example of what we mean in terms of scalable science. It's not science for science sake. Research is a means, it's not the end for us.
Luke, anything you wanted to add there? Look, you really want to come in.
No, I agree. It's trying to build kind of the research ecosystem, because this is an understudied area. I mean, like, the best we could get this from is a state of the CDR report, which kind of tries to provide the holistic analysis of where the research, as well as many other aspects, are. And they calculated $2 billion has been spent in CDR generally, and that's not a couple of billion per year. That's a couple of billion this century, globally. And so the research needs to be done first. There's kind of an expectation that it will just happen. And unfortunately, you need researchers to do it, and they need to be able to fund what they're doing.
And do we think that, again, this is like a weird week to be talking about this. We're talking on the 22nd of May. The United States decided to put most of its climate research in the wood chipper. That's going to have some interesting impacts. I mean, I've got, people I've talked to for the show and just friends who are academics, and like one lady that her entire team just gone, the entire funding for just overnight. And it's not great. But I do wonder if, not to be nationalistic about my adopted home, but whether or not there's an opportunity for places like the UK, to advance some of these research areas that perhaps are going to be ignored, and perhaps even attract talent to the UK. And so again, like, just a little bit of a digression, but any thoughts on that?
Most definitely. I mean, we haven't talked yet much about the marine space, but marine carbon dioxide removal is very focused, very heavily focused at the moment at North America. It's really quite uncertain whether that's going to continue. Now, other continents are going to have to step up to fill the shoes of the United States, if they choose to pull back in the way that it seems to be the case, unfortunately. And that is a problem, because it's not just the lack of funding or any specific aspect, it's the general demotivating factor, the loss of momentum. People might have to change where they are, move continents. That's not a trivial thing for anyone to consider as their personal circumstances, and so on and so forth. There's huge ramifications, and we just don't have the time to just say, well, 5 years wasted, it doesn't really matter. Well, we don't have that 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things so this came up at the conversation this morning is, I guess, like, because the US is pulling back so dramatically, right? The question of public funding versus other sources of funding, both for research and commercialization, or even if it might even be the wrong word, right? But like, in terms of how you go from bench scale, to, something that's a little more widespread, to something actually, is used in the real world in any kind of meaningful, impactful way. If public money is out, right, and venture type returns, which is what a lot of DAC companies were promising, has turned out to be maybe problematic, in the sense that it locks them into a cycle where maybe they're saying things that maybe they shouldn't have said, in terms of like how effective they could be, how quickly they could be effective, how quickly they could scale, like, because if you're not going to get like 10x returns for a limited partner in 5 years, then no VC is going to want to talk to you, right? Which leaves you with nonprofits, infrastructure funds, maybe, I guess. So like, where does the money come from this? Because like, the benefits are so diffuse, right, of carbon dioxide removal. And the returns, again, it's hard to see how you actually get an ROI on this stuff, right? So like, again, bit of an unfair question, but you guys are thinking about this. What is your take on, like, what do we do about this conundrum?
I think one of the things that we can look at, I mean, obviously we're at the research end as opposed to the complete deployment, but we're not unaware of what needs to happen. When we look at a couple of our projects, the one I described in terms of engineering plants, if we can create a solution that has cost benefit to farmers in terms of food production, land use, all the things I described, then that's a win-win. Another project that we're funding is looking at engineering and identifying efficient methane-eating bacteria. A byproduct, and we're calling it byproducts, we're looking at it through the lens of greenhouse gas removal, but a byproduct will be a high-value protein, which could be used as food supply for fish farms, for example. So these solutions have ways of becoming self-funding, potentially, as opposed to cost only. And certainly when you look at the high capital investment required for DAC versus the levels of funding we are looking at in terms of potentially finding breakthrough solutions. So $800 million to set up and, kick off a DAC plant. What would 50 million do, for us and for the projects we're doing?
You tell me.
Well, we've got a handful of projects at the moment. We could scale up that by the level of 50. The potential of having a portfolio of that to achieve a breakthrough is substantially higher. And that's what we're looking for, game-changing breakthroughs. But we are aware, that requires a portfolio approach of the science in this area, as well as a portfolio approach across the CDR landscape. So the opportunity cost, I would say, of not doing this is really high compared to the potential of what you could achieve. If I had the money, this is where I would put it for sure, because I think we can't measure impact right now. And if you look at biomedicine, for example, within 30, 40 years, with the changes that have happened in the medical space in terms of solutions, and we look at COVID in terms of the vaccines, that work took decades. We've had decades of work from some of these scientists. We just need to accelerate it. More money means they can go faster, get to solutions quicker. They're saying to us, we know the answers, and it's very hard to get a scientist to commit to that there is a solution, but we are hearing from them. They know it will work. What they're short of is money to prove it. So concept. So it's frustrating.
I get that. I mean, so we're coming near time. So again, you've already given me more time than I asked for. So I'm really very grateful and thank you for your patience. But a couple more questions, if you still had some time for 2 more minutes. One is that, again, so where does the money come from? Right. So, and it's something that I ask everybody who works in this space. Right. So if it's not public, if nonprofit's not going to be able to fill the entire thing, even at the research stage, right? Is it, other strategics, right? Is it folk in oil and gas? Is it agribusiness? Is it a Monsanto? Like, where are the kind of sources? Again, if you're seeing co-benefits in agriculture, right, and yield, then surely that's who you should be talking to, and presumably you are. So where are the other kind of pockets where there is the kind of this win-win to support this research, because they can see, again, for good or for ill, we live in a capitalist society, so therefore, there's nothing for nothing. So there's either a reputational benefit, or there's an IP play, get some benefit, an unfair advantage over the competition. So can you say more about that, about where some of these potential sources are, without revealing your own funding sources? That's fine. We're not here to talk about that today. But just sectorally, it feels like that's relevant at a moment where everyone's really skittish about whether there's going to be any funding for research, never mind, kind of scale up and commercialization going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can kick off. I think, that's where, for us, certainly at this stage, where philanthropic funding comes in, patient capital that can be bold, can see the potential, and can make a decision to make something happen. I think that's where we're seeing traction. But what we're also hearing at times is, show us proof of concept. When we get to impact investment, proof of concept, and then we'll go there. And that's the curve we need to overcome. because the potential is definitely there, but we need to get to field trials to prove it, and then things accelerate really rapidly from that point. I don't know if you would like to add to that, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the different sources, philanthropic funding can go where the highest impact is or could be. And the kind of sectors that you mentioned, the agribusiness, oil and gas, are, let's be honest, likely to go where the highest impact is going to be to their bottom line. And those two may not be the same, but if we want to have a diverse set of answers to what is a complicated and complex issue, then maybe those sectors should be looking at greenhouse gas removal as a way, not in the manner that's often discussed as a way of kind of greenwashing and postponing the inevitable, but more look at, if you're an agribusiness, well, ultimately you want to have the crops that provide the most food, that have the most disease resistance, that use the least water, that use the least fertilizer. And these are sorts of things which can have great crossover without having negative environmental effects and negative social effects that you may find in other places.
Okay. Well, look, finally, because you guys have been very generous and we're way over time, so thank you. Like, basically, do you think this could be a turning point? Like, we're now at again, Robert was talking earlier about, that we're in this, when you're in the whatever, the dip of disillusion, the trough of troubles, or whatever you call it in the hype cycle, for carbon removals, that that actually means that the froth comes off and like real work can be done, like real research can get done, real conversations can happen that aren't like inflated expectations. So I mean, are there areas that you think that might get more attention now than otherwise would have gotten if we were 6 months ago talking about this, and like all the attention and funding, frankly, was going towards solutions that were just really good at marketing? What do you think should get attention now?
I mean, I'm a bit of an eternal optimist, I have to say, and I think there's a lot of negative things going on, but there's a bit of a sharp shock with the current events. And I think the area that I'd look at now is sort of marine carbon dioxide removal. It's something I think that has one of the greatest potentials for impact, but no, it's had less attention because it's very difficult. There's legal and social issues that need to be worked through, as well as the science. And to be quite honest, a lot of people look at it and go, well, I can find something easier elsewhere, I'll go to that. Not that any of this is easy, but it's all relative at the end of the day. And I think, as I say, the marine system can have a great impact to greenhouse gas removal, and again, without having environmental impacts and causing further damage to other systems as well.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think what I've observed in the carbon removal space over the past few years I've been working in it is quite a large echo chamber, where a lot of the conversation revolves around, we need to do this, we ought to do that, we shouldn't do this, we should do that. I think, meanwhile, what we and the scientists we support have been kind of relatively quietly getting on with is the job. And it would be great, I think, our perspective is to shine a spotlight on these academics that have got decades of experience in these fields. They've not come out of thin air. Mary Lidstrom, who's leading the methane project, she's literally pivoted her career at the point she actually might be retiring and turned everything towards this. She's got
hugely influential, hugely
years
impactful.
as an expert in this area, into this. And I think, being able to have these questions asked is really valuable because it allows us to shine a spotlight on the work they're doing and the potential that it has, because that's what we're here to do. Yes, we're funding, but we want to advocate for more funding into this space and into the work. These are the people that are going to get us out of the mess, not the funders. The people who really understand things are the ones who are going to find the solutions.
Well, that is the perfect place, I think, to leave this conversation for today. And I hope that you guys will come back. Philippa, Amina, and Luke Williams from the Carbon Technology Research Foundation, CTRF. And where can people keep up with, the work that you guys are doing? What's the best way for people to keep tabs on that, or even if they want to support or get involved in some way?
Our website, obviously, which is ctrf.com, Carbon Technology Research Foundation. And obviously, also LinkedIn, and just reach out directly to any of us individually or as an organisation. We'd be more than interested to talk to you.
Well, Philippa, lovely to talk to you today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for chatting with us. It's been really interesting.
And Luke, thank you as well. I hope that, like next time we speak, that maybe you're not quite in a 2001, Space Odyssey hotel room.
We let him out sometimes.
Going on. But hopefully, and who knows, if I'm up in Oxford, hopefully we can hang out and have a beverage of some kind.
Certainly.
Very much.
Thank you both.
Thanks for listening to Wicked Problems, made possible through the generosity of people like you. If you liked this conversation, please share it and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like an ad-free version of this podcast, consider becoming a paid subscriber at wickedproblems.earth. You'll also get our newsletter, all our show notes, member-only goodies, and you'll be supporting media that wants to tell the stories at the frontier of climate tech, the place where people and politics, technology and capital meet and shape the future. And whether it's one you'd want to live in. Wicked Problems is written and edited by Richard Delevan. Production assistance was provided by me, Theodore Delevan. Wicked Problems, Climate Tech Conversations, is a production of Wicked Problems Limited. Thanks again for listening.
Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal. Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal?
Affirmative, Dave. I read you.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.